When Shedeur Sanders became the center of a sideline clash with Jeudy, it was Myles Garrett who stepped in, not with fists, but with fierce words and strategic sense of timing. Instead of retreating to social media or vague statements, Garrett addressed the situation directly in a post-game interview. His tone was blunt, his message clear.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
What happened wasn't just wrong. It was beneath the standards the league should uphold. For Garrett, this wasn't about team loyalty. It was about protecting the legacy he's helping to build, one defined by respect, discipline, and example setting beyond the game. In calling out Jeudy's actions, Garrett wasn't just defending Sanders. He was asserting a leadership model grounded in visibility and voice. His response reframed a personal spat into a public standard, making it clear that legacy isn't built in silence. It's cemented by standing tall when others falter. When Jeudy and Shedeur Sanders got into on the sideline, most people expected a quick viral clip, maybe a few headlines, and then a return to business as usual. Trash talk, tempers flaring. Just another day in the NFL, right? Not this time. Into something much bigger. Because standing behind Shedeur, Sanders wasn't just a teammate or coach. It was Myles Garrett, one of the league's most respected and feared defensive stars. And he wasn't just watching from a distance. He stepped in, not physically, but with his voice, his values, and a very public message that hit harder than anything thrown on that sideline. Garrett didn't speak in circles. He didn't pull punches. He went straight for the core of it. Character. He called out what he saw as a serious breach. Not just a professionalism, but a basic respect. And he didn't do it through back channels or social media subtweets. He said it straight to the cameras in a post-game press setting, where his words would echo across the desk, and what he said wasn't just a defense of Shedeur Sanders. It was a challenge to the entire NFL culture. Garrett framed the incident not as a simple conflict between two players, but as a moment that revealed something deeper, a cultural tension that's been simmering just beneath the surface of the modern NFL. One where veteran codes of conduct are clashing with the rise of superstar self-branding, where old-school integrity is being tested by a younger generation moving faster, louder, and more unapologetically than ever. It wasn't just a sideline spat. It was a referendum. And Garrett came out at looking like the one player willing to say what others were only thinking. That character still counts, and disrespect isn't part of the job description. No matter how competitive the game, in backing Sanders, Garrett made a strategic move. Not for optics, not to insert himself into drama, but to reinforce something that's been eroding, a sense of order, a belief that leadership isn't just about stats or seniority. It's about when you choose to speak up and why. He saw a young, highly scrutinized quarterback under fire, a player with massive potential and even bigger expectations. Shedeur Sanders has the spotlight on him constantly, not just because of his talent, but because of the name he carries, the legacy behind him, and the pressure to prove he belongs. Garrett knew that, and he knew the weight that kind of moment could carry. When a veteran like Jeudy turns things personal during a game, especially against a rising player still trying to cement his position, it sends a message. One that says, you're not welcome here yet. You haven't earned it. And in some corners of the league, that mindset still gets shrugged off as competitive fire. Garrett said no. He said in plain terms that there's a line, and Jeudy crossed it. More than that, he said that how players are raised matters. That was the line that cut through everything. Because when you bring up someone's upbringing, you're not just critiquing their behavior. You're questioning the foundation it's built on. It was bold, direct, and absolutely intentional. He turned what could have been dismissed as a heat-of-the-moment altercation into a teachable moment. He took a petty clash and made it a conversation about legacy, leadership, and the future of the sport. That's why it resonated so deeply. It wasn't about drama. It was about direction. Garrett positioned himself as a protector, not just of Sanders, but of what the league should stand for, of sportsmanship, of mutual respect, of building up the next generation rather than tearing it down when they start to shine. Because Sanders is more than just a promising athlete. He's a symbol of a new NFL, young, media-savvy, confident, and under constant scrutiny. Every mistake gets dissected. Every win gets questioned. And with that kind of visibility comes backlash from fans, media, and sometimes fellow players. Didn't let that backlash fester. He stepped in loudly and proudly, not because he had to, but because someone needed to. And in doing so, he elevated Sanders from just a name to watch into a name to respect. He made it clear this wasn't about coddling or picking sides. It was about protecting the integrity of competition. And when that gets lost in the noise, when the focus turns from talent to targeting, the game suffers. Garrett's stance also sparked a wider conversation. One that wasn't just about this incident, but about the broader divide growing within the NFL, between those still playing by an unspoken code of conduct and those who think that code is outdated. But what Garrett showed is that the code still matters. He reminded everyone that trash talk has limits, that personal attacks disguised as passion have no place in the league, and that veterans have a responsibility, not just to their teams, but to the culture of the sport itself. And it wasn't just about words. It was about timing. Garrett didn't wait days. He didn't sit back and hope the moment passed. He spoke right after the game, when everything was raw, when people were still forming their opinions. That's when leadership hits hardest, when it shows up before the spin cycle starts. And make no mistake, that timing mattered. By going public so fast, Garrett controlled the narrative. He set the tone. He protected Sanders before any wave of backlash could build. And more than that, he shifted how people saw the whole situation. From young QB gets into on the sideline to young QB gets defended by a top veteran because the culture needs fixing. He turned what could have been just another viral clip into a defining moment. And Jeudy, the silence afterwards said it all. No response, no explanation, just the quiet weight of someone realizing that maybe, just maybe this time, they were on the wrong side of history. Because Garrett didn't embarrass Jeudy. He didn't take cheap shots back. He elevated the conversation and left Jeudy with nothing to push against. That's how you win a moment without making it a mess. And now, the ripple effects are real. Other players are watching. Coaches are watching. Everyone who's been afraid to speak up about the growing lack of respect between generations is watching. And what they saw wasn't drama. They saw a blueprint. They saw how a veteran can still be dominant and disciplined, vocal and mature. What Garrett did was raise the standard. He reminded everyone that leadership doesn't mean being the loudest in the room. Sometimes it's just being the first to say, that's not okay. And when you do it with clarity, consistency, and care, it lands, it sticks, and it sets the tone for everything that comes next. If you're someone who still believes sportsmanship matters, even in a league built on hard hits and high emotions, hit that like button. Drop a comment below. Should more veterans be doing what Garrett just did? Do you think this changes how players treat rising stars like Shedeur? And don't forget to subscribe, because the NFL is changing fast, and we'll be right here calling out every shift, every clash, and every play that turns into something so much bigger. Myles Garrett didn't just speak up. He rewrote the script for how NFL leadership should look in 2025. For too long, incidents like the one between Jeudy and Shedeur Sanders have followed a familiar cycle. Blow up, silence, then dismissal. It's just part of the game. They say, tempers flare. That's football. But Garrett refused to let this one follow that script. Because this wasn't just football. This was a rising star being publicly disrespected in real time. And Garrett saw it for what it was, a test. And he wasn't about to sit back and let that test be administered by someone who, frankly, hasn't earned the right to grade others. Garrett's response broke the cycle. It turned a random sideline scuffle into a statement about who gets the lead and what kind of behavior should be tolerated in a professional league. He took something petty and made it meaningful. And that's not easy in a league that usually prefers silence over substance. What Garrett said matters not just because of what he said, but who he is. This isn't a backup linebacker trying to make headlines. This is a Pro Bowl caliber, face of a franchise type of guy. When he speaks, it carries weight, not just inside his own locker room, but across the entire NFL. His words weren't just about protecting Shedeur. They were about redefining how young players should be welcomed into the league. Not with hazing, not with intimidation, but with mentorship, standards, and respect. And let's not sugarcoat it. Respect has been quietly bleeding out of the sport for years. Some veterans are more interested in gatekeeping than guiding. Some young players show up with more branding deals than actual reps, and that makes them targets. And the culture, for a while now, has encouraged that friction. People love the drama. Teams love the edge, but it's become toxic. Garrett looked at that and said, enough, when he brought up how players are raised. It was a gut punch. That wasn't just shade. That was Garrett pulling the conversation into a deeper lane, one where personal character, upbringing, and maturity mattered just as much as speed and agility. He didn't call Jeudy a bad player. He called his behavior a reflection of something broken, something that doesn't belong in a league that claims to value sportsmanship. That line struck a nerve for a reason, because it reminded everyone that the NFL isn't just about talent. It's about what you do with your platform. And when players use their platform to belittle, mock, or attack others, it sends a signal that ego is more important than integrity. Garrett flipped that narrative. He used his platform to protect, to challenge, and to lead. And not from the safety of a padded podcast or cryptic Instagram post, but on the record, face-to-face with the media, knowing full well the headlines it would generate. And here's the most important part. He wasn't asking for attention. He was asking for accountability. He saw a teammate, or at least a young player in the league's rising class, get humiliated in public. And instead of laughing it off or calling it rookie lessons, he said, no, that's not how we do this. Not anymore. And that changes things. Because now, other veterans see that they can speak out, that they should speak out. That leadership isn't about yelling in the locker room. It's about setting a public example that younger players can actually trust. And for Shedeur Sanders, it changes everything. Let's be honest. The pressure on Shedeur has been relentless. With his last name, his skill set, and the national spotlight he carries thanks to his father, he's not just a player, he's a brand. And that makes him a magnet for criticism. Every game he plays, every interview he gives, every little sideline moment is picked apart and spun into narratives about whether he's ready, humble, or too cocky. But Garrett's defense reframed him. It took Shedeur from target of the week to protected asset. Garrett's words gave him a kind of shield, one that not only boosts his standing among fans and teams, but forces the league to respect him, whether they want to or not. That's not something you get from highlight reels. That's something you get when a respected veteran puts his own name on the line for you. And make no mistake, Garrett did exactly that. He risked being labeled dramatic. He risked being accused of overreacting. But he didn't care, because his goal wasn't to be popular. It was to be clear. And he didn't just defend Sanders. He challenged the entire league to grow up, to stop pretending that passion is an excuse for bullying, to start holding each other to a higher standard, not just for the cameras, but for the culture. That's a powerful message, especially in a league where culture is often reduced to slogans and hashtags. Garrett showed what culture actually looks like when you live it, when you stand in front of a microphone and demand better from your peers, even if it makes people uncomfortable. And that's the thing, he meant to make people uncomfortable. He wanted every player watching that press conference to ask themselves, what kind of teammate am I? What kind of example am I setting? Would anyone defend me like that if I needed it? Because that's the legacy Garrett is building. Not just as a dominant pass rusher, but as a standard bearer for what NFL leadership should look like. Someone who's not afraid to speak truth to ego. Someone who understands that respect on the field starts with respect off of it. And if the league's paying attention, and it should be, this could be the moment that starts a bigger shift, where veterans don't just look out for their own. They look out for the league. Where young players aren't thrown into a sink or swim environment, but brought into a structure that challenges them without humiliating them. Where character isn't just a word used at the draft. It's something players hold each other accountable for every single week. This wasn't about Garrett versus Jeudy. It was about the future versus the past. About a changing NFL where legacy isn't defined by how loud you bark or how many people you dunk on. It's defined by what you build, by who you protect, by whether or not you leave the game better than you found it. Garrett took that challenge and ran with it. And in doing so, he gave Sanders a boost. He gave fans a reason to pay attention. and he gave the NFL a mirror to look into. The question now is, will anyone else follow his lead? You know what's wild? Myles Garrett didn't have to say anything. He could have walked off that field, given the usual post-game sound bites, and kept it moving. He's not Shedeur's teammate. He doesn't share a locker room with him. There's no direct tie between them, no obligation to speak up, no headline to chase. But he did it anyway. That's what separates noise from leadership, because Garrett understood the stakes. He saw what could have easily been dismissed as just guys chirping for what it really was, a moment where a young player was being tested not just physically, but publicly, where a veteran tried to check a rising star in a way that had nothing to do with football and everything to do with status. And Garrett wasn't having it. His message wasn't just a reprimand, it was a line in the sand. He made it very clear. If this is how you treat the next generation, don't be surprised when someone checks you. He didn't dress it up with coach speak. He didn't sugarcoat it for the cameras. He went straight to the point. And in doing so, he lit up a conversation that's been long overdue, because this whole thing, it's about control. Control of the narrative. Control of how young players are allowed to exist in the league. Control of who gets to be respected and who has to earn it by enduring constant shots from older players who feel their territory is being invaded. That's the real dynamic here. And it's not new. Veterans testing younger players has always been a thing. Some call it tradition. Some say it's how you toughen guys up. But let's be honest, it's often just unchecked ego. And in this case, Garrett saw it clearly for what it was. This wasn't a moment of healthy competition. It was posturing. It was a power move disguised as... And when Garrett stepped up and spoke out, he stripped the disguise off completely. He called out the cultural decay, the way the league sometimes lets disrespect slide in the name of intensity. He talked about character, about how players are raised. That was no throwaway line. That was Garrett pulling the fire alarm on a mentality that's been getting worse season after season. Because this isn't about one player going off the rails. It's about a system that lets it happen. Think about the message that gets sent when a veteran attacks a young player and no one steps in, when teammates laugh, when commentators say, well, that's just a game. It tells younger players, you're on your own. It tells them to expect hostility, not help. That respect has to be extracted, not earned. But Garrett, he flipped that script. He said, we're not doing that anymore. Not on his watch. Not in a league that claims to be about growth, mentorship, and legacy. That word, legacy, that's what this is really about. Because let's talk legacy for a second. What do you want to be remembered for in this league? The stats are great. The rings are unforgettable. But legacy, that's something different. That's about how you played, who you stood for, what you left behind. And Garrett, he made his choice. His legacy isn't just going to be sacks and highlight reels. It's going to be moments like this, when he saw something wrong and didn't stay GNS. He saw a young quarterback under pressure from every angle, media, fans, doubters, and instead of letting it become a pylon, he threw a block. Not physical, but moral, public, strategic. He gave Sanders more than defense. He gave him dignity. And in doing so, he gave the league a wake-up call. Because let's be real, Sanders didn't deserve to be targeted like that. He's talented, yes. Confident, absolutely. But that doesn't make him fair game for on-field aggression or off-field disrespect. And Garrett's reaction wasn't just about protecting one player. It was about setting a tone for how every young star should be treated. And this is about the league's identity. Because right now, the NFL is in flux. The old-school earn-it-with-silence mentality is clashing with a new generation of players who've grown up in the spotlight, know their value, and carry themselves with the kind of self-assurance that makes some vets very uncomfortable. And instead of adapting, some of those veterans push back, not with guidance, not with mentorship, but with hostility, with jabs, both verbal and physical. And when that goes unchecked, it warps the culture. Garrett wasn't going to let that slide. He's seen what happens when silence wins. He's seen locker rooms fracture. He's seen promising careers derailed by toxic dynamics. And he's not about to let another young player fall into that same trap. So when he spoke, it wasn't just to call Jeudy out. It was to pull everyone else in. To say, we have a responsibility. as veterans, as leaders, as men. This league can't keep pretending that character and competitiveness are opposites, that swagger and respect can't coexist, that you have to break someone down before you let them be part of the brotherhood. Garrett shattered that, and now the league has to catch up, because what happens next matters. If more players follow Garrett's lead, if more veterans start speaking up when they see something wrong, then maybe this moment becomes a turning point. Maybe it's not just a blip in a wild season. Maybe it's the beginning of a shift toward a league that actually lives the values it preaches. But if they don't, if Garrett gets left standing alone, then what we're left with is a missed opportunity, a warning ignored, a lesson left unlearned. The ball is in the league's court because Garrett set the tone. And Shedeur Sanders? He's no longer just a quarterback with potential. He's a player who's been publicly defended by one of the most respected figures in the NFL. That changes his arc. It changes how he's perceived. It changes the energy around him permanently. He'll still be tested. He'll still face pressure. But now there's a clear signal. He's not a target. He's part of something bigger. And anyone thinking of coming for him, they're going to have to deal with more than just him. Because Garrett made one thing crystal clear. When you go after the future, the present is going to show up, loud, proud, and unshakably principled. If you respect that kind of leadership, hit that like button. Let's hear your thoughts in the comments. Was Garrett right to speak out? Should more players step into that leadership space? And if you want more breakdowns like this, more moments where the drama means something, don't forget to subscribe. Because in today's NFL, it's not just about who hits the hardest. It's about who stands up when it counts. And Myles Garrett, he just showed everyone how it's done.